Laura was used to silence. It had become the soundtrack of her evenings ever since Michael passed away 3 years ago. At first, she fought against it, playing the television too loud, keeping the radio on even when she wasn't listening, calling friends just to fill the emptiness. But eventually she gave in. Silence became easier than pretending. Her home, a modest 2-story house in Portland, felt like a museum of her old life. Every corner held a memory, and every memory carried weight. That Friday evening was no different. She had made herself a simple dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, then curled up on the couch with a book she had read a dozen times before. Outside, the sky was fading into that soft Pacific Northwest gray, the kind that arrived early and stretched the night longer than she wanted. She was halfway through a chapter when it happened. A knock at the door. It startled her. No one ever knocked. She had no visitors, no family nearby, no neighbors who came by unannounced. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it. But then it came again, firm, polite, unmistakable. Laura hesitated, setting the book down slowly, her heart quickening. When she opened the door, the cool air brushed against her skin, and there he was. A man, tall and slightly out of breath as if he'd hurried. He looked younger than her, maybe early 30s. His brown hair a little messy, his smile tentative. He carried a cardboard box in his arms, the kind people use when they're moving. "Hi," he said, voice warm but unsure. "I just moved in next door. Thought I'd come introduce myself." Laura blinked. A new neighbor. She had seen the for sale sign disappear weeks ago, but hadn't seen anyone move in. She wasn't prepared for this, not dressed for it either. Just in her soft gray sweater and old jeans, hair pulled into a careless bun. For a second, she thought about shutting the door and pretending she was busy. But his expression stopped her. It wasn't pushy. It wasn't forced. It was simply kind. She managed a small smile. "Oh, welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks," he said, adjusting the box in his arms. "I'm Ethan. Sorry for dropping by out of the blue. I figured it might be nice to say hello. I'm still unpacking and realized I don't know a single person here." Laura nodded slowly. His honesty disarmed her. There was something open about the way he spoke, as if he wasn't trying to impress her, just telling the truth. She hadn't met anyone like that in a long time. "Laura," she replied, stepping aside slightly, though not enough to invite him in. "I live here." "Nice to meet you, Laura." His smile deepened, genuine. He set the box down on the porch with a relieved sigh. "I was carrying this around thinking I'd find a place for it, but I think I just needed an excuse to stop by." She almost laughed at his confession. Almost. But the sound caught in her chest. She wasn't used to laughing anymore. Still, she found herself curious. "What's in the box?" "Books. Too many of them, actually. I don't even know if I have enough shelves." Something softened in her. Books, something she understood. She glanced at the shelves behind her couch, overflowing with novels and memoirs, some stacked in uneven towers on the floor. She hadn't spoken to anyone about books in years. "You'll need shelves," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan caught the words and chuckled. "Guess I'll have to make that my next project." He shifted on his feet, then asked, "So, how long have you lived here?" The question was simple, harmless, yet it carried a weight Laura wasn't ready for. This was the house she had shared with Michael, the place they dreamed about when they were young, the place they thought would be filled with family someday. 3 years of silence had dulled the memories, but they still lingered in every corner. "A while," she answered vaguely. He seemed to sense the boundary and didn't press. Instead, he picked the box back up, smiling again. "Well, I should let you get back to your evening. Just wanted to introduce myself. If you ever need anything, I'm right next door." Laura almost said goodbye then. She almost closed the door and went back to her quiet routine. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the way he didn't force conversation. Or maybe it was simply that knock, the first sound in years that had broken through the silence. "Ethan," she said before he turned. He looked back, eyebrows raised slightly. She cleared her throat. "Welcome to the neighborhood." His smile widened, softer this time. "Thank you, Laura. That means a lot." And then he left, carrying his box of books to the house next door. The porch light flickered on as he walked away, and she stood in the doorway longer than she needed to, watching him disappear into his new home. Closing the door behind her, Laura leaned against it, surprised at how her chest felt. Not heavy this time, but unsettled, like something had shifted, something small yet undeniable. She picked up her book again but couldn't focus on the words. Instead, her mind replayed the knock, the smile, the sound of his voice saying her name. She told herself it was nothing. Just a neighbor. Just a polite introduction. Nothing more. But as the evening stretched on and the silence crept back, Laura realized something she hadn't admitted in years. For the first time since Michael's passing, she wasn't completely alone anymore. And she wasn't sure if that frightened her or gave her hope. That night, when she turned off the lights and crawled into bed, the memory of Ethan's smile followed her into sleep. She didn't know it yet, but the knock on her door had opened more than just an evening of small talk. It had opened a door she thought she had locked forever. The day seemed ordinary. The knock seemed ordinary. But for Laura, it was the beginning of the day everything changed. The next morning, Laura thought about the knock again. She told herself it was silly. Why should she care about a new neighbor? But something about Ethan's presence had stayed with her. She noticed the house next door now, the faint sound of boxes being moved, the truck parked in the driveway. For the first time in a long while, she found herself curious. She tried to ignore it. She made coffee, washed dishes, even sat by the window with her book. But when she saw him outside, struggling with a piece of furniture, she couldn't help watching. He tried balancing a heavy wooden shelf on his shoulder, nearly losing it twice. Laura sighed, setting her cup down. Against her own instinct to stay invisible, she walked outside. "Need help?" she asked. Ethan looked up, surprised but grateful. "Honestly, yes. I think this thing wants to crush me." She grabbed one end, and together they maneuvered the shelf through his front door. His living room was a mess, boxes stacked everywhere, tools scattered on the floor, and half-built furniture in the corner. He laughed nervously. "As you can see, I'm still working on making this place livable." Laura smiled faintly. "It takes time." They set the shelf down against the wall, both catching their breath. For a moment, she stood awkwardly, not sure if she should leave. But Ethan gestured toward the boxes. "Would you like to stay for coffee? It's instant, nothing fancy. But I could use a break," she hesitated. She hadn't had coffee with anyone in years, except colleagues at work. Yet something inside her said yes. "Sure," she said quietly. In his kitchen, he cleared space on the counter and handed her a mismatched mug. They sat on 2 stools, sipping coffee that was far too strong. Ethan made a face after his first sip. "Guess I need to learn how to measure." Laura chuckled softly. The sound surprised her. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Ethan noticed but didn't say anything, only smiled as if he was glad to have pulled it out of her. As they talked, Laura realized how easy he was to be around. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't pry into her past. Instead, he spoke about his job as a graphic designer, the city he'd left behind, how he wanted a quieter place to start fresh. "Portland seemed like the right choice," he said. "Close enough to life, but far enough to breathe," she nodded. She understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. Over the next week, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes it was intentional. He'd wave from his porch when she watered her plants, or she'd nod at him while collecting her mail. Other times it felt like coincidence, meeting at the grocery store, running into each other on evening walks. Each time the conversations grew a little longer. One evening, Ethan appeared at her door with a plate in his hands. "I made too much lasagna," he said, "and I figured it's better shared than wasted." Laura almost declined out of habit, but the smell was too inviting. "Come in," she said softly. They ate at her kitchen table, the first time in years she had shared a meal at home with someone. The conversation flowed easily. He told her about his favorite books, his attempts at cooking, even his failures. She found herself opening up more than expected, about her work at the library, her love of gardening, the small joys she still clung to. When dinner ended, Ethan stood at the door, plate in hand. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said with a smile. It's nicer than eating alone. Those words stayed with her long after he left. She knew the ache of eating alone all too well. And now, she realized, she didn't have to. Days passed, and Laura began to notice subtle changes in herself. She looked forward to evenings, hoping for a knock on the door. She made more effort with her garden, knowing Ethan often glanced over the fence. She even caught herself humming while cooking. Life felt lighter. One Saturday, they sat together on her porch, sipping iced tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold. Ethan leaned back, watching the colors fade. "You always look like you're carrying too much on your own," he said quietly. The words struck her. She wasn't sure how to respond. No one had said anything like that to her since Michael passed. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Maybe I am," she admitted. Ethan didn't push. He just sat there, his presence steady. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. The bond between them grew in ways neither expected. It wasn't dramatic, not rushed. It was in small moments, sharing coffee, fixing a loose step on her porch, walking side by side in comfortable silence. Yet those small moments began to weave into something bigger, something neither could ignore. But with that bond came fear. Laura lay awake some nights, heart racing, wondering if she was letting someone too close again. She had promised herself she wouldn't risk another heartbreak. But the truth was clear. Ethan was no longer just a neighbor. He was becoming part of her life. And though she tried to fight it deep down, she knew that scared her most of all. The evening closed with Ethan leaving her porch, waving goodnight. Laura watched him disappear into his house, her chest heavy with a strange mix of hope and fear. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. Ethan's knock had opened more than a door. It had opened her heart, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. Laura told herself she wouldn't let Ethan get too close. She had spent years building a quiet wall around her life, and she didn't want it broken. But Ethan didn't ask for more than she could give. He didn't push or pry. He just showed up, steady, patient, kind, and somehow that was even harder to resist. One afternoon, heavy rain swept through the neighborhood. Thunder rolled, and the lights in Laura's house flickered, then went dark. She sat in her living room, the sudden silence pressing down harder than usual. She reached for the candles in the drawer, her hands fumbling. Then, as if on cue, a knock echoed at her door. She opened it to find Ethan holding a flashlight. His hair was damp from the rain, his smile sheepish. "Power's out on the whole block. Thought you might need some light." Laura hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." They set the flashlight on the table, its beam cutting through the darkness. Laura lit a few candles, and soon the room glowed in soft, flickering light. The storm rumbled outside, rain streaking the windows, but inside the air felt calm, too calm. Ethan sat on the couch, looking around her living room. "You have a lot of books," he said, his tone warm. Laura nodded. "They keep me company," he smiled but didn't comment further. Instead, they sat together, the storm filling the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt different. She hadn't shared silence like this with anyone in years. After a while, Ethan leaned forward to adjust the flashlight. Their hands brushed just for a second. Laura pulled back quickly, her chest tightening. It was nothing, just an accident. But the warmth of that brief touch lingered, stirring something inside her she thought had been buried for good. Ethan noticed her pause but said nothing. He simply leaned back, giving her space. That, somehow, made her feel both relieved and unsettled. As the storm dragged on, their conversation flowed more easily. Ethan told her about the years he spent working in Seattle, about how the city felt too fast, too loud. "I needed to start over somewhere smaller. Somewhere I could breathe," he said softly. Laura found herself opening up too. She told him how she had worked at the library for years, how she loved the quiet order of it, how the scent of old books felt like home. She didn't mention Michael, not yet, but Ethan didn't seem to need that piece of her story to understand her. The storm lasted into the night, and when it finally passed, the house was filled with the steady hum of silence once more. The candles had burned low, the air heavy with melted wax. Ethan stood stretching. Guess I should head back before the lights come on. Thank you for letting me wait it out. Laura walked him to the door. She wanted to say something, anything, to explain the mix of emotions swirling inside her. But the words stuck. Instead, she simply nodded. Good night, Ethan, he smiled, warm and steady. Good night, Laura. When she closed the door, she leaned against it, her heart racing. That evening had unsettled her in ways she didn't want to admit. The brush of his hand, the steady presence, the quiet understanding. It was too much and not enough at the same time. The days that followed carried that memory with her. At the library, she caught herself thinking of the storm. At home, she noticed the faint sound of his footsteps outside, her chest tightening every time he passed. Ethan, for his part, didn't push. He greeted her with his usual smile, helped carry her groceries when he saw her struggling, and waved from his porch when she watered her plants. Nothing more, yet those small gestures made it harder for Laura to keep her distance. One evening, as she walked back from the grocery store, she saw him fixing something on his front steps. He looked up, saw her, and waved. She waved back, her pulse quickening for reasons she didn't want to name. Need help with those? He called, nodding to the bags in her hands. She shook her head quickly. I've got it. But when she reached her porch, one of the bags tore, spilling apples onto the ground. Before she could react, Ethan was already there, crouching to help her gather them. Their hands brushed again, and this time the pause lasted longer. She pulled away, clutching the bag to her chest. Thank you, she murmured, avoiding his eyes. Anytime, he said softly, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, even in the cool evening air. For a moment, they both stood there, neither moving, caught in a silence that was far heavier than before. Then Laura stepped back quickly, unlocking her door. Good night, Ethan, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good night, Laura. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment. The storm, the flicker of candles, the touch of his hand, the way he looked at her without expectation. She had spent years telling herself she was done with love, done with risking pain. Yet now cracks were forming in that wall she had built. It frightened her, but it also made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Laura didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Ethan wasn't just a neighbor anymore. He was becoming something she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried. And as she drifted into restless sleep, she knew this was only the beginning of a change she couldn't stop. The days after the storm carried a new weight between Laura and Ethan. The silence they shared no longer felt like emptiness. It felt charged, filled with questions neither dared to ask. Laura tried to distract herself. Longer hours at the library, tending her garden until her hands ached. But none of it kept Ethan from drifting into her thoughts. One evening, she found him on her porch. He was leaning against the railing, waiting quietly as if he wasn't sure she would open the door. When she stepped outside, he gave her a small smile. Hope you don't mind me stopping by, he said softly. I just needed some company tonight. Laura hesitated, then sat beside him. The summer air was warm, the street still and calm. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan broke the silence. You don't talk about your past much, he said, his tone careful. I don't want to push, but I'd like to understand you better. Her chest tightened. For years, she had avoided this conversation, even with herself. But something about the way he asked, gentle, without demand, made it impossible to turn away. She stared at the sky for a long time before answering. My husband's name was Michael, she began. Her voice was steady at first, but softened as the memories rose. We were married 15 years. He was everything. Kind, steady, the sort of man who made every day feel safe. She paused, her throat tightening. Ethan stayed quiet, letting her find her words. He got sick. It happened so fast. One day we were planning a trip. The next I was sitting in a hospital room watching him fade. And when he was gone, I thought I was gone too. Her voice broke, the weight of years pressing down in that single confession. She had never said it out loud like this, not to anyone. Ethan's hand moved slightly, resting near hers but not touching. "I'm so sorry, Laura," he whispered. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the porch lights across the street. "After he died, I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone in again. It felt easier to stay closed off than to risk that kind of pain." She looked at him then, finally meeting his eyes. "But lately, you make it harder to keep that promise." The air between them shifted. Ethan's expression softened, his voice steady. "I don't want to replace him. I just want to know you, the real you, even the parts that hurt." Her heart trembled at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not since Michael. And for the first time, she realized something important. Caring for Ethan didn't mean forgetting Michael. It meant allowing herself to live again. The thought scared her, but it also freed her. They sat in silence, the night wrapping around them. Then Ethan shared his own truth. "I came here to start over too. My last relationship ended badly. She said I wanted too much. Commitment, family, a future she didn't want. I thought maybe it was me, that maybe I was asking for something impossible." He turned toward her, his voice low. "But when I met you, it didn't feel impossible anymore." Laura's breath caught. She had spent years hiding from love, and here he was, offering it without demand, without pressure, just honesty. The porch light above flickered, the hum of crickets filling the silence. Laura knew she stood at a crossroad. She could retreat back into the safety of her solitude, or she could step into the unknown with Ethan. Both choices terrified her. But only one offered the chance for something more. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing his. This time she didn't pull away. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, "but I don't want to be afraid anymore." Ethan's fingers closed gently around hers, steady and sure. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, the words wrapped around her like a promise. For the first time since Michael's passing, Laura felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe again, enough to believe that love could exist in different forms, that it didn't erase the past, but built on it. The night stretched on, but Laura didn't notice the hours slip by. She and Ethan talked until the stars blurred into dawn, about their dreams, their fears, the small hopes they carried but never dared to share. By the time the first light broke across the horizon, something had shifted between them, something permanent. As Ethan stood to leave, Laura walked him to the edge of the porch. She didn't want him to go, but she knew he would be back. "He always came back. Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked. "For knocking that first day." He smiled, that gentle smile she was beginning to treasure. "Sometimes all it takes is a knock." She watched him cross the yard, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, she didn't dread the silence that followed, because now she knew it wouldn't last. Laura closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her life hadn't returned to what it was. She knew it never could. But something new had begun, something fragile yet full of possibility. The past would always be part of her, but the future, for the first time in years, felt open. And it all started with a simple knock. Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. And for Laura, the day she opened her door to Ethan was the day she opened her heart again.